This session is a map panel, a candid conversation, scaling generative AI from experimentation to enterprise success. And with that, I'm going to hand you over to Boris Bialek.
Hi guys, we still have losses, as you can see. There are 4 pictures up. You can choose 3 faces out of those. This is a candid conversation, and a conversation is a bi-directional activity. So my job is to triangulate between you and my lovely panel and to make funny comments. Does it sounds good? Yeah? Everybody is really encouraged to ask questions inside as well. This is not a marketing-oriented session. The word candid had a reason here in this one. So it's totally okay to raise your hand. Dudes, you're full of it. Try again. And this is not funny. This is legit. So why don't we start first with a short introduction who we have here. I start with Max at the end. Maybe you introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Max. I'm a developer advocate for a company, Nomic. We're a startup based in New York, and we make data mapping software. So our partnership with Mongo is because we train an embedding model that people can use to search through their data in Mongo. Embedding models are something that I'm very passionate about. They make data more searchable in an unstructured way. I joined Nomic because I'm really passionate about these models and explaining how they bring a lot of value. That's what I'm really most passionate about. Yeah.
Works. Matt, by the way, way less hair on the picture than right now. So.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
It gets big. So, hi everybody, Matt Shelley. So, I joined Accenture as part of an acquisition called Medano, so focused on data and AI for the financial services sector. Since the acquisition, which about 4 years ago, I've been running the Data and AI Lab for effectively the UK and Ireland group within Accenture. What does that mean? So, at the kind of start of kind of the genAI boom, it was very much kind of getting demos out there that are showing the art of the possible associated to various different business use cases. But over the years, this has been very much more focused on, well, how can we use these technologies innovatively to help our clients get to production? Yes, it's very easy to get a chatbot working, but to get it into production needs a lot of extra thought and controls and things like that. So that's what I've been doing with our clients as well as kind of building some of those capabilities internally.
And that was a perfect setup. I appreciate that one. Thank you very much. The point why we're here is we see a lot of clients I think we can all talk about, and what we see, and I make always a joke, which I repeat now the 50th times, which is, so we have an AI strategy, our board decided we do AI. So how's this working for you? That was a joke. Okay, and when we take a look at this, the interesting part, I think, where we're coming from right now is this experimentation phase where people build their little chatbot with 5 PDF files, which is awesome, by the way. We've done the same thing. We have actually a little leafy bank demo with that. But to say, how do I productize this? How do I deal with the challenges? So let's be a little bit unfair. Max, you have components. Where do you see the challenges for people moving Nomic from experimentation to production?
Yeah, so one thing that I started doing when I started experimenting with genAI is I first of all just wanted to play with it. So I think the reason that a lot of people find themselves in an experimentation phase, and the reason that there is this problem of people feeling stuck in the experimentation phase, is because it is just very fun and easy to get started. That was really not the case until a lot of these genAI model providers started making really easy APIs. So I think, people fall into these patterns because it's really, really easy to get started. The basic thing that I think you need to move out of that is to move away from being a single person giving a demo and make sure that other people can really run and battle test what you've made. And then the other main theme is cost tracking. So lots of demos are very fun and cheap to make, but when it is time to actually serve thousands of concurrent users, whatever you've made as your initial demo just simply will not work. So that's one of the things that we really focus on making our model support, is not just a small RAG demo with a couple of PDFs, but making sure that you can actually run embeddings and operate over millions of documents and have that actually be something fast and cost effective. Embeddings are data that can take up a lot of storage, and even though it's a really fast way to search, you can still do things to make it way, way faster. So that's a quick answer. I can talk in more detail about some of that stuff, but one is having other people actually try to run your demo, and two is making sure that you're scaling up cost effectively.
Cool. How do you benchmark?
Well, one of the main benchmarks for embedding models is an average, a lot of different retrieval tasks and clustering tasks. So we benchmark to make sure that the embeddings are processing data well, both for, really for a couple of different tasks. We use embedding models in our software for clustering data together and for also enabling RAG inside of our product. So we're measuring a couple different performance metrics and also making sure that when you change the properties of the embeddings, one of the things I'm very excited about is quantization. It replaces floating point embedding vectors with binary embedding vectors, and you massively reduce the cost of operating over the vectors and the amount of storage that's taken up by storing the vectors. And so we benchmark our model on embedding benchmarks for retrieval and for clustering, both on the full precision embeddings and on the reduced embeddings, to make sure that when you modify these vectors, they're still doing a good job at these retrieval tasks, at these clustering tasks.
You went very deep, very fast.
Yeah, I'm very sorry.
This is okay. So let me try to rephrase that, and then Matt can take you apart. Let's make a deal. So, but the first starting point was, so you say benchmarking, basically scale out, understand what your models do actually cost-wise for the size.
Yeah.
That was a starting point. And the second one was to ensure that when you do this, you keep cost in mind by using things like quantization. What is it? Quantification, English language.
Yeah,
Quantification or quantization?
the process of quantization. It takes embedding vectors, which are these high-dimensional arrays of numbers, and
be careful with your mug, dude. If you hit Matt with this thingy,
it's empty
that's not.
now.
Oh, okay, that's fine.
I hadn't noticed.
Yeah, but I was sitting here the whole time saying something will happen. Okay, go on.
Do people know what embeddings are, just by a show of hands? Maybe you've been here. Okay. That's about 2/3 or 3/4 of the room. Great. If you've looked at an embedding vector, you'll know that it's a long list of numbers and it's a bunch of floating point values. You can replace all of those decimal numbers with just zeros and ones. And the purpose of that is to use a lot less information to try to represent the same data in your embeddings. Yeah, please. Okay. Embeddings are able to be changed and still group similar documents to similar vectors. So taking all of the floats and just converting the positive floats to 1 and the negative floats to 0, you still have a high-dimensional vector, but it's way less data in memory, but it's still able to be this tool that can support search, support RAG, but just do so much faster.
Okay, so that was 2 items. First, benchmark and scale, then quantization, notification, English language, Boris. And good, but that was already very detailed. I wanted actually to start way higher, but it's still okay, thank you very much. Matt, when you start on your thing end-to-end, where do you see the move from experimentation to production really going?
Yeah, so I guess there's a few things, and kind of building on what Max has said, right? Bringing your business and stakeholders along with you. So unless you have a business that actually wants, the demo that you've built, and ideally the demo has been built because the business wanted it in the first place. But not just at a oh, that's cool kind of perspective, but from a actually this is in line with my strategic priorities of my area. I can see how this builds in, towards something greater. This might be the first thing of, a whole series of things, right? That you want those stakeholders to kind of telling you that, and then that, deeply drives requirements into what your production asset needs to do, and how it's going to be controlled, and how your users are going to interact with it, and how they're going to react to it, right? In terms of, if you want to build a GenAI asset for your complaints workforce, the complaints workforce needs to understand it and, want to use it, or it actually help them and not be just another thing to swivel chair from their main, application to something that's created a summary of a customer conversation, right? You want that summary of the customer conversation to be embedded into their existing application. So this is something that we've done. We've got into production and brought those users along with us because we had that really strong sponsorship.
But if you do that one, sorry to interrupt you here. I'm thinking we're doing this now. We got the buy-in. Everybody buys in. How we do this. I want neither of you. So I'm the contrarian here on the stage, by the way. I'm allowed to do whatever I want. And CI/CD, neither of you mentioned. How do you move this stuff actually from experiment physically over? So how much do you see this part coming?
Huge, right? I mean, my starting point was the business, right? It always has to be, right? But CI/CD is hugely important in the sense of and putting a lens of it of coming at it from the benchmarks and metrics and acceptability, right? So, okay, I now have a new model has been released by OpenAI, and I want to upgrade my service to use that because on the face of it, latency is going to be better, and I'm going to get a better experience for my customers, or whatever the benefit is, right? So, having CI/CD to enable the deployment of that model and is great, but actually, you also are going to need the pipelines to test and reevaluate that model in a very strong way. And so, when it comes to control, which was kind of another piece that was sort of mentioned around benchmarks, working through, building actually a lot of that synthetic data or real data to test and evaluate your solution is absolutely critical to actually getting into production in the first place, but is also critical for when you've got changes coming, right? And then the CI/CD wrappers are the things that enable you to do that in a consistent and coherent way to maintain it and longer term, right? So it's very, very important, but I don't think it's the first thing that you need to worry about, right?
So now I'm getting interested because you mentioned now testing and synthetic data. You mentioned benchmarks. How much are you talking about the same thing, or is this different? Because you didn't mention data, but you mentioned embedding in models. You mentioned models and model change and synthetic data. So what tip would you give people how to tackle that problem? Either way, or you can both answer after each other. So,
well, I don't want you to be the only one giving contrarian opinions up here.
Okay,
I have a contrarian opinion.
Yeah. By the way, you guys can throw stuff by now.
I think a lot of what people are working on for RAG might be solved by making a better FAQ page. Like actually scoping out what are the questions that are frequently asked of whatever website we're making, if you want to have a RAG customer support chatbot or a RAG documentation chatbot, you might be first better off just robustifying your frequently asked questions, because if you do, that's also upstream of a better RAG app. That is the information that you would want to be made available in your data, available for the chatbot. So I think I could have started higher level when I was talking through what's really
so I didn't want to interrupt you then. So, but back to the testing data. So we talked synthetic data. You're talking write a wiki page instead.
Yeah.
That's kind of, by the way, really contrarian, but really cool. But how do I start that process? I'm serious now. So I have my playground. Now I need to go into what are the testing cases I need to build, and how do I build them?
Yeah, I can have a crack at that. So I'll actually build upon what you're saying around the getting your FAQs right, because we got a customer-facing chatbot into production. It's publicly acknowledged that Accenture helped Vodafone get their Voxy, so a sister brand, chatbot into production. You can go on the Voxy website. It's live now to 100% of customers. That's a RAG-based chatbot. And what we did as part of our POC, first stage, right, 8-week POC, the building the chatbot off their FAQs was week 1 done, right? That's the simple part, is just getting it to answer some questions with a vector database. We knew that weeks 2 to 8 were going to be about test. They were going to be about proving, right? Because this was the proof point. Prove with this model, this is something that we would be happy with in production. And what does happy with in production mean? It means it's answering the questions that it should answer. It's not answering the questions that it shouldn't answer. It's not being tripped up by adversarial questions. It's not being, even like the tone is right. It's not being overly verbose. It's keeping to the brand guidelines. It's not telling you about EE, right? And how Vodafone isn't as good as EE, or vice versa, right? When it's being tripped up.
So people try that.
Yeah, you can go try it now, right? Have a go. If you can break it, let me know, right? And I'll go and speak to the guys, and we'll pull out the logs, right? And we'll use it to make it even better. But it's been through a lot of testing. And when going back to the testing question, what we started with was going, okay, here's your FAQs. Ask genAI to find for every single FAQ article 10 questions that could be asked that would be answered by this FAQ article, right? Because then you start to build your ground truth that when on retrieval, that this is the right this is the right context to be pulling back, right? We then did things like, well, okay, regenerate those 10 questions in 5 different tones, where a tone could be overly verbose, overly concise, angry, with spelling mistake, etc., right? And then that built us over 2,000 test questions that are now with a ground truth that we can use to test. That's just your questions that it should answer. We then gathered about another 2,000, 2,500 questions that it shouldn't answer, right? These are all your responsible AI ones of, being, trying to trigger it into being racist, or even just give like investment advice and things that you just don't want it to do. So then you build effectively your test data set, and then you can start to think about, well, what are the metrics that we want to actually test for, right? We used an open source tool or library called RAGAS. Has anyone heard of RAGAS? Yeah. Starts to split the problem of retrieval or RAG into. Tell me if I'm going on too much. Right?
No, this is exactly why we wanted this one. And by the way, folks, feel free to throw stuff and ask questions. Those who sit totally behind me, it's okay, but you have to be really noisy so I can see you guys.
So RAGAS breaks the problem down into looking at the retrieval and looking at the generation and kind of comparing between the things. So is the generated information consistent with the context that was pulled? Is the context that was pulled similar enough back to the original question, and various different kind of combinations of these things between the question, the context, and the retrieval, and the generated text. And then through that, you start to get a number of metrics that you can start generating against this same set of test data to start seeing how your generation was working. We then also applied some things like the sort of readability scores, and they're pretty standard. We also looked at, we built a bit of our own kind of assessment, LLM as judge on the questions that it shouldn't answer, or where some of it is like, okay, well, we put in a stock response if we've actually managed to detect it. Because we put in detectors and all these other extra things as well to try and start controlling it. And then through those metrics, and those metrics are going to be bespoke for every use case. I say they're bespoke. You're going to need to pick and choose those ones that are out there, but then also maybe define some of your own. And then work out with your client, and this is where the business element comes in. What's those thresholds of acceptability, right? For Vodafone Voxy, right? If there's one swear word that comes through, it's absolutely, no-go, right? If there's, somewhere where it kind of takes the bait a little bit and answers a question pretending itself as a pirate, maybe you can have one or two of those in your test data set of 2,000, right? But each of those, we actually applied, some additional controls to try and feed those out, and again, Candid answer.
But it was a good one. So let me try to get this together. So you said per each FAQ page, you said 2 good ones, 2 bad ones. Per each page, 10 good ones, 10 bad ones. I think that is a good sample you give people. And then the other one was in 5 styles, angry.
Yeah, we had angry, we had sort of, the original standard, we had angry, we had verbose, we had concise, and we had spelling mistake or grammatical mistake.
So I think this is something, honestly, never heard about that before. This is really cool info. So Max, how would you test? So he has a rule and he has a tool. Yeah. So rule, tool, cool. So what is Max doing?
Well, you were talking about all of the negative cases that you now have to handle. Building a chatbot is opening up a massive surface area of possible failures. I come from New York City. New York City, about a year ago, deployed a RAG chatbot that would be available for any citizens to ask about, frankly, anything. And it was a bit of an embarrassment for the city because it was extremely easy to get it to say ridiculous, incorrect, silly things. And I'm not sure really how much money the city was saving or how many lives were being saved by deploying this thing. So I think in general, unless you're really specific about what metrics are being improved or what time is being saved, you're opening up a massive opportunity for reputational risk for your firm. So one thing that really helps with this is really making sure you've planned out what exactly you want the chatbot to do in cases that it was not designed for. And one method that I've personally had success with and seen others had success with is just building a classifier that operates on the user's input before the genAI part actually runs. And this classifier should be something that just predicts how typical is this input. You can get more fancy with that, but just by filtering out the responses that are extremely atypical relative to your development set will allow you to say, oh, and if the user's input is not recognizable or extremely offensive or against the purpose of this application, you prepare other responses. There's a chatbot that a large company deployed for their online retailing website, and people were asking it questions about how to write Python. That chatbot is not a Python support chatbot. It's to help people buy things.
It just helps people, and maybe they wanted to buy Python.
No. They didn't want this thing to help people buy Python, but they didn't have intent classification operating on this chatbot. So it was just this completely open season. And it's possible they didn't really suffer from that, but I think a little bit less of them now.
So sorry if I'm going back to the beginnings, but the classifier. How do people start building a good classifier?
Yeah.
Are there tools you suggest?
This is an extremely biased answer, but
bias is good.
I suggest Nomic Atlas. You just upload data and it gives you a scatter plot of all the data. So it will group all of, let's say you've already deployed a test chatbot and you collect 1,000 items of interaction. Our software is meant to visualize natural language and images and any data that you can produce embeddings for.
Somebody has a question, sorry.
Oh, yeah.
I was wondering, with clustering and not classifiers, so if you want to do classifiers you were describing with intent, how does one go about that?
Well, you need clustering in order to actually classify high-dimensional data and start labeling it. So once you cluster it, you can much more quickly label things in groups. Instead of having to label each individual item, oh, should this have been a good answer or it should be a bad answer? Once you cluster, you can see, oh, here's all of the thousands of times that users were trying to be mean or trying to trip up the chatbot. So once you can see the large patterns in large clusters, it just makes the data curation and the data labeling much, much more efficient.
In practice, you have really separate groups, very often they overlap. How do you solve that?
So our software allows you to, at the same time as clustering, apply other filters so that you can say, oh, even if these are clustering right now, I can find whichever filter gets one of my clusters to activate, even if they were overlapping. That's a nice question.
That was actually pretty cool. I learned something.
Yeah.
So we built classifiers, we built test cases, 10 good, 10 bad questions per page in 5 languages. So that's how we start prepping. We started slightly going after this CI/CD question, but somehow I still have the feeling there was always these experimentations somewhere, and then we go live and we need a CI/CD. Then you went into test, which is great, but how would you then go after that one into an upgrade? Obviously, so one answer was, we have the classifier. This allows us a pre-filtering and behavioral kind of firewall. It's a dangerous word. Is this okay? Yeah. How would you call this?
There are other products that are really trying to be a full-fledged firewall support system, also to catch things like really subtle prompt injections. That's not something that a very simple classifier will really handle. So I don't think the kind of classifier that I'm talking about that you could fine-tune a BERT model to do or another embedding model, I don't think that really rises to the level of firewall. It will still miss some edge cases, but yeah, thinking about a firewall I think is really important just because I think it starts forcing you to think about like how you quantify the cost of your errors. In general, I think people should be building these chatbots with a sense of how much money is saved by it working properly. And then, in terms of quantifying the cost of mistakes, I think it's important for people to separate, even in genAI, what's a false positive and what's a false negative, and how might they cost different actual money amounts in production. A false positive for a simple classifier would be finding something that was not actually there, and a false negative would be missing something that actually was there. So those problems can cost extremely different amounts depending on the context.
So that starts now getting interesting. So we have a classifier, firewall. Matt, what other components do you want to sell? No, just kidding. What components do you suggest?
To get into production.
Production.
Yeah. So we haven't talked much about monitoring and, hang on.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but I have good news. We have found our other guest for today.
Yay.
Please welcome to the stage, everybody. This is Yaron. Oh, and just one other thing, by the way, if you have questions, they're more than welcome, but please just raise your hand so I can find you with the mic really quickly so we can make sure everybody can hear and it's all recorded. Thank you very much. Sorry to interrupt, guys.
It's all right. Yeah, so we're talking about getting into production, talking about monitoring, we're talking about how do you build the observability into your application that the business are going to need to see so that they are comfortable with it running in production, right? And some of that monitoring is from a business perspective. So has my chatbot sworn, right? Has the generated text within maybe a more of an integrated solution, talked about complaints earlier, is that still reaching good thresholds of acceptability, and are people continuing to change the summaries based off other work that these agents have maybe have done? So there's the business level of monitoring, like how effectively, to a large degree, how are a lot of those metrics that we develop during test, how are they continuing to perform? Maybe there's some other hard flags like, has this used a swear word that's on our list of worst swear words that I've ever seen at work? Has it done that? I mean, short answer, just put in some keyword controls, so it won't. But there's those sorts of monitoring. Then there's the sort of the cost monitoring, the latency, how is the actual technical solution continuing to run, and that's where you start using a lot of those cloud monitoring tools that you've got existing already. Maybe you're enhancing them slightly with more LLM-based kind of activities of how long is it taking to get a response from the API, and how many tokens are you using, et cetera, which might not come immediately out the box. So any solution is going to need that level of capability to get into production if your IT folk are going to sign off on it, if your business folk are going to sign off on it. So lots of work there to do, not necessarily an out-the-box solve solution either.
So let's do a quick interruption. Yaron, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, sorry for being late first.
You don't need to apologize to me. There's a bunch of people here.
I apologize to everyone for being late. Just rushing between engagements here. Anyway, I'm Yaron. I'm a co-founder CTO for Iguazio. I currently part of McKinsey. In McKinsey, I lead this notion of productizing genAI. I work with tier 1 clients. All those challenges you discussed, we're working on their implementation together with the various clients, tier 1 banks, telcos, and so on. I'm also doing regular speeches and conferences. I wrote a book on MLOps. Was CTO and VP for other companies, including Mellanox, got acquired by NVIDIA. And I know Boris for like 20 years now, maybe.
That was an info nobody should have had, but it's okay. Thank you. No, but let's get into it. You heard already Matt talking a little bit about what you need to consider for production. Literally, we are at the core subject here of moving from scaling from experimentation. We talked about on the embedded side how we can identify upfront problems. We talked about how we start test. So I know you guys are really big on the word AI factory. How would you define your AI factory in that context?
So first, what we see is about 1 out of 10 projects sort of makes it to production. So 9 are.
So 1 second. He says 1 out of 10 makes it to production.
I mean, seeing our clients try it to do it themselves, I don't think that's too dissimilar to what we see the clients doing. If you come and get Accenture to come and help, it'll be 1 for 1.
Okay, fair enough.
Or
Max?
McKinsey,
So,
yes.
yeah, or Max?
A funny correspondence is that a lot of the major AI labs, like Meta, when they're generating synthetic data to train their own LLMs on, they tend to throw out like 90% of the synthetic data. So in that context, the GenAI data that's generated that is actually valuable enough to keep is about 10% of what's generated.
Right, but I'm not talking about that part. I'm saying someone is building an application, forget the LLM. I think part of my problem, by the way, is that most of the focus clients have our own LLM, where the significant portion of the challenges are actually on the data side. With indexing, versioning, and so on, and cleaning, and if you're in a real organization like a bank and so on, you have to ensure privacy, so you have to do PII filtering of the content and so on. So there's a lot of things that are associated with the data. Usually when we break the problem with clients, we break it to four main areas. One is the data, and it has a lot of different aspects, whether it's also the vector databases. Take as an example, if I put my Mongo aside, there are a lot of enterprise features that are missing in those databases, like versioning, transaction semantics, and so on. Give you a simple problem. You take a document, you ingest that into a vector database. It contains 100 chunks. What happens when you create a new version of the document? You get 50 chunks old version, 50 chunks new version. In some cases, you may actually have 200 chunks, 100 of each version, and your bot will ask a question and will get confused. So there are a lot of challenges that people overlook. This is on the data side. Also, we don't see enough practices of tests.
That was the discussion we had before. So sorry to cut the test part. We were onto that one as well, yes.
Yeah, so testing, a lot of people just bring up an application, then it sort of does stupid things, and they just roll back and close the project. So instead, you've seen it in sort of places. So I think you have to generate labeled data, maybe 1,000 examples of questions with labeled answers, and also question, how do you really test? Because there is some randomness here. And you have to have test harnesses. We've seen cases that changing the OpenAI model version will break the application. So people say, no, we're not training the model, so we don't need to test. No, obviously you need to test. And you need to build sort of CI pipelines and also a strategy to roll back in case of issues. The other aspect is all the application pipeline, where you need to productize. You mentioned CI/CD. It's microservices. What about elasticity? Many applications may require GPUs. There are a lot of issues around getting GPUs, access to GPUs, scaling GPUs, and so on. And the final bit that you were discussing was the monitoring. How do you collect telemetry? And telemetry observability is across all those aspects that were discussed, whether it's resource management, application management, measuring the model behavior. Traditional AI, it's more like drift, accuracy, and so on. As you introduce GenAI, there are new things like hallucinations, bias.
We're not there yet. Sorry. But let me cut you off a second.
And business KPIs is the highest tier of monitoring, where you want to make sure that the application really makes money. So you need to do attribution. It's a little more sophisticated.
I want to, sorry, Matt, I loved how you said, 1 out of 10. What is, in your opinion, the attributes which makes it 1 out of 10?
For our clients that typically trying by themselves?
Either way, so what besides hiring McKinsey, Nomic, or Accenture, or you're using MongoDB, obviously, but what is really the driver? What makes a good project for you guys?
So it goes back to one of the points I made at the start, right, is having that business vision and buy-in, right? Without it, you're not going to have someone striving and going, well, you know what, this isn't quite right now, but I can see that there's good work that's been done, and I'm going to continue to sponsor this, and I'm going to continue to drive this forward. And I had a good discussion yesterday. I was with a high street bank. We're talking about their customer servicing from the retail arm, and they're considering a kind of full root and branch kind of rework of their across all channels customer servicing in the light of GenAI. So traditionally been looking at the IBM Watson-esque kind of NLU based chatbots, and actually they've done compared to a lot of organizations, they've done all right with that. Their digital journeys, they've got, customer satisfaction are way higher than as soon as people call up. And so that was such a great conversation to be part of, because they are speaking to what's the equivalent of their AI factory that the bank has kind of got going, and going, well, that's great that they've got that started. It means that they're starting to build the right capability and the skills internally to go and deliver use cases. But the use cases they're picking out are very piecemeal. They're not strategic. They are, interesting. Well, okay, we're doing some summarization of core transcripts. Well, the retail folk have already got AWS Connect, and there's a feature in there now to summarize the calls. Like, well, is the summary that the AI factory is going to make better than the summary that the AWS Connect is going to make? Well, they're now doing an experiment associated, right? And you start to go into these kind of rabbit holes. And actually, where this organization is trying to drive it from is like, well, across the whole landscape, any channel, like, what is the right thing to do? And then, we're thinking about agents, as in like the LLM-based agents. They're thinking about empowering their human agents, who want to call them super agents, that can handle multiple things and that they wouldn't have been able to deal with previously, because the knowledge of what all the different products and the services that the bank is offering is just too great. Well, but if those agents are powered by and behind the scenes got AI helping them, like, how does that improve our call center experience? Can we bring more of our complex journeys into the digital realm, like complaints, like mortgages, etc.? So back to what makes a great, back to the question, but what makes a great project is that wrapper of the vision of the business stakeholder, driving it forward, and through that, driving the requirements into the AI factory of, well, actually, you need to be doing this better. Like, we know this is possible. Like, build up the capability of your platform, right? Not just focus on the use cases, like, and because the platform is going to serve the use cases, and the use cases serve the business.
So if I take Yaron plus Max, you're outclassed. They say technology doesn't matter. You need the right business case. Experimentation is wrong. You start out with experimentation is needed. So I'm a little bit unfair now. I'm challenging here, but seriously, when we take a look, there was obviously a lot of thinking, plan, business. Isn't that kind of the opposite what happens right now in the AI space?
You mean people tinkering and deploying without a concrete long-term vision for a business plan? Well, it's very unfortunate. I'm not sure what to say about it. I mean,
no. It's an open question. I mean, this is because when I hear Yaron and Matt, they both say structure, business, purpose. That's 1 out of 10. But we are all experimenting. So opening up here. So
first, it's okay to experiment, and innovation can come also from people that have technologies, that have ideas. I think part of the challenge is that they think that whatever they build as experiment is production ready, and then they're starting to think about challenges around scale, observability, etc. And what they built in experimentation, they just throw to the garbage and redo that from scratch with more production orientation. Sometimes also the people implement these experiments are not necessarily skilled engineers, maybe some data scientists play around with LangChain and so on, so they don't necessarily have the view of what it takes to do production. In McKinsey, we do have those two arms that I'm more on the technology arm, but we have the business arm, and usually we go together to the clients with both aspects. Of one group essentially works with the client on business ROI, what's the right thing, because we know, for example, for banking, we know what are the 10 most common use cases we already built. So we work with the client on those use cases. We build UX and all the user experience, and then the technologists like me and others build. And there's a lot of focus with most large clients is also on building the right platform, because usually they may have multiple applications to build. And what we also see is cross-connect across applications. So For example, maybe the thing that summarizes the calls, the context from that could be used to train the chatbot and so on. There's synergy. Maybe the same data that you ingest and index could be used on 3 different bots. So instead of building it as a vertical application, we're trying to say, okay, what are the platform elements, and then have applications on top.
So this is something which is now new for me as well, which honestly I didn't tackle like that, which is kind of obvious. You brought the word platform up and really have a holistic view. And obviously, Matt, your organization as well, you guys have consulting and technology both. And Max, we're the techie guys, sorry. But I want to open it up as well. We have here 3 absolutely experts, as you probably realize. If anybody has questions, this is really, from the timing now as well, a great point to ask. Otherwise, we can just continue, obviously. But if anybody has any comments on this one? No? No? Nobody's daring to? Free t-shirt. I don't have one, but I find one. No? Yes?
You've just brought up an interesting point that people experimenting, we all do. We even have now genAI lab that do exactly that, experimenting. But you say if there is already a tool like AWS, like other companies, everyone is now selling AI tools that are kind of better than what you can do in-house. But the problem is, how do you know that those tools are actually good? Because we're all at the beginning of this, yeah? So if the company claims that tool is great, it doesn't mean it's great.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, so how is, for the company, so that's why many companies trying to do in-house experiments and hoping to bring something to production because they don't trust other solutions. Like, how to see this? On the one hand, you can save money by using what's already good, but you don't know.
It's a build or buy, right? It's kind of back to that. It's a really good question. Yeah. So, look, I think, don't get me wrong, experimentation absolutely has a place in the organization when you're looking at GenAI. And the example I gave around AWS Connect, providing summaries out the box versus summaries that the AI factory, think of a better word, is building, is a really good one, right? Because actually, the summary out the box might be great for your call center employees who just want to be able to scan, a single paragraph summarized from a 45-minute long conversation. When they next speak to the customer, it calls up, they've got the summary in front of them, broadly covers what was discussed. Is that summary going to be a great summary of the conversation for your complaints agent who's going to use that call to help do an investigation into what was the root cause or things associated to that complaint? Absolutely not. It's a completely different thing that they're going to be looking for. They're going to be looking for a summary of what were the expressions of dissatisfaction, a summary of what were the actions that were discussed on the call that needed to happen, which of those actions were actually resolved on the call. They probably will also want to know things like what was the complaint reason? Can we actually match that to some of the coding that the complaints team would actually have? And the summary to the complaints agent is a consolidation of all those things. Is definitely going to be bespoke and attuned to the actual business process that organization has. So that for me is the distinction between the kind of build or buy. It's like, okay, well, it might be doing X. Let's have a look. Let's explore whether it's actually useful. We can switch it on, and that might not cost us very much. It saves us our experimentation costs, et cetera, and any integration costs, whatever, right? But make sure that you're looking at what your business process is that you're trying to use that information for, or that product for, and test whether it's going to be valid, because most of the time it's not. And I think there's another point, sorry, I know I keep going on. It's to do with the strategic nature of GenAI generally, right? It is a one in a 10-year, 15-year, maybe 20-year disruption, right? Organizations, enterprises know that they can't just buy everything, because if they buy everything, it will be that they won't grow their own in-house talent, and they might go and tackle a few sort of efficiency gains across the organization in terms of that. Take that summary again, that summary of a call transcript. Great, really great, right? But are you able to work with the nuances of your organization and drive new business value? So actually, back to the customer servicing example, are you actually going to root and branch improve your customer's experience and as a result start to drive more business through your organization? You're probably not going to be able to do that with out-of-the-box solutions. Right? You might get some parts of it, but you're going to need that strategic capability.
And I had a discussion with the CTO, and he was brutal. He told me, Boris, yes, thank you, we have the first solution running today. Do you think we use any of that technology in 12 months? And I was like, "Bleh." So there was a whole team building something out in deepest loft, did all the testing and everything. And this gentleman simply says, it's all junk. The second we deployed, it's junk because the market moves so fast. Whatever model we choose today, we will not choose in 6 months. And that was, for me, a very brutal experience to understand change is needed and change in infrastructure is just so dramatic. So that was my personal opinion in that space.
Yeah, I think it's really beneficial to stay modular with some of these things. So integrating too early with a massive provider of some of these things would make the experimentation sometimes harder if you're not staying small with your ability to swap things out and actually A/B test different prompting techniques, different models, different retrieval techniques. It's still really beneficial to have a small modular implementation of what you're working on just to, stay very flexible. Things are changing really, really quickly.
Yeah, and models by now weekly. I mean, when I see, at the beginning I was wowed. I admit it 12 months ago when people say, oh my God, there's a new model. Oh, this can do this one and they've that pattern. And by now, like the weekly model update, it's like you go, this company, this company, this company, this company. And this is becoming pretty brutal. But there's a question.
Hi. So I have a question regarding this pluggability of these models, right? So for example, we are building a solution using some X model, some version of vector database, embedding model, things like that. Now new model comes in, exactly to your point, right? Everything breaks. How to change this? I mean, so we try doing that, but then we have to basically change pretty much everything, the ranking, retrieval, the prompting, everything. So every 6 months, if you do this, then your solution is not stable, isn't it? Right?
Which brings us back to the beginning of the discussion. How do we test? How many test cases
But
do we
even
do?
if you test it, let's say, but
I
you
don't
would like to
necessarily
upgrade, isn't
understand
it?
why you need to change all the stack. And if you change the model, usually what we couple with the model is the prompt, but the embeddings could be done on a separate model. From our experience, what we're telling clients is essentially there are certain things that are bigger investment and take longer. Invest most of your energy in that. Create modular architecture for the rest. For example, the data infrastructure takes a lot of time to build. The vector databases, the ingestion pipelines, the testing, primitives like data privacy removal, things like that will take you time. So invest your time in that, invest in CI/CD, invest in things that are more infrastructure. But changing the lang chain sort of workflow, that's not the big issue in the application. And there we want to build something, again, that modular, what we've built internally in McKinsey, because my team serves about 5,000 data scientists internally. So we have a lot of crazy people building experiments that we need to serve. So we created reusable components with well-defined interfaces, so they use. And then if we need to change something underneath, we'll keep the interface. So it's very important, the modeling, how the API looks like, so you can take into account future changes. Now, I want to refer to your question before on the make versus buy. We also seen that phenomena when the call center we call it consent or analytics. We don't call it summarization. Because again, a summarization you could get from Zoom, you could get from anyone. But what most of our clients are really interested is analyzing the call. For example, what are the main topics? What do they think about certain product versus other product? What is the sentiment of the agent? How did the call flow went? You know, was there a good introduction in the beginning for the agent, etc. So it's sort of classification. You take the transcription and you run. So maybe initially we have to build audio models and noise cleansing, etc., to do the transcription right, and then build the rest of the classification. But as you go into some of the tools like Genesis or others, now they do the transcription by themselves, so I can sort of ditch that part and plug directly into the integration with the call center tools that start to evolve. So the way we look at it is how much the thing is generic, you know, how much the problem is generic. If we get clients that say, you know what, we need the document retrieval solution, say, okay, there are a bunch of those, just go and use one of those. But if they're starting to need something, whether, for example, they want to manage their own data and they want to build those automated data pipelines and they want to do more sophisticated searches, or then I'll tell them go build that. So it's first is how much the thing is generic and reusable across verticals, use cases, etc. So, and you may have this optical problem. You're saying the product, this commercial product doesn't have that features, and you say, okay, I'm going to build it, but it's going to take you a year or two to build it right. So you need to interpolate and think, where is that commercial product going to be a year from now? Oh, where is it right now? The other thing that we see, the reasons to make versus buy, is when we see that you essentially need a platform, not one use case, and that there's synergy across use cases, as I mentioned. Like if we need the data to be used across multiple applications, and I buy a vendor product and I store the data but then I cannot use it for a second application, it's an issue. So I'll say, okay, you know what, I'll just build a platform and, you know, and do that myself.
Interchangeability was a big item. Matt talked about that one as well, I think, on the business line item. When you say interoperability, obviously there's self-serving answer option, which is if you use MongoDB and Bison, JSON model, what belongs together, stored together. But this is really not the question, right? The question is from the business level side to have this connect. You mentioned platform, and you both all mentioned interconnected projects versus the single chatbot. So where would you help her in that regard when you say this interconnection make versus buy? Obviously your answer was invest into the fundament, that's okay. But does this help from the business case?
Yeah, I guess it sort of depends whether, if actually one of the points you made, right, is the thing that you're trying to do core to your business, right? If it is, then where do you get your competitive advantage if you're just going to get a vendor to go and do something that's out of the box, right? You're not going to get that. So there's that kind of element to kind of start considering of like, well, if I want to be able to be dynamic and innovative around this part of my business, then I'm going to need to build, and I'm going to need the platform, and I'm going to need to think about all those things like the interoperability and use cases that are, you know, use the same sorts of services, and I'm going to build that capability so that I can be nimble and I can be faster than, you know, having to work with a vendor because their capability isn't up to scratch yet, but we want to get them to do it, and then they're also working for 6 other companies, and you're not the prior. Like, forget it, right? If it's core to your business, go and work on it, right? Because that's where you're going to take the edge. Yeah.
I wanted to mention something inspired by this gentleman's question. Lots of data scientists or ML engineers want to take their RAG application or their AI application and swap out the LLM or swap out one thing, and then all of a sudden the whole pipeline breaks. One thing that I have found successful is a Python library called DSPy. I don't know if you're familiar with that one. For those who are not, it's a framework for optimizing a full pipeline, not just one piece of an LLM application. So if you have a well-scoped evaluation set and a well-scoped evaluation metric, this can be something to auto-learn a combination of prompts in a few different parts of the pre-retrieval and post-retrieval part of RAG. So thinking of the application as something that needs to be re-optimized end-to-end every time any individual component changes, that was really helpful for me.
Yeah, from my experience, we build use cases and we just change the models all the time. Because we have, for example, customers that have on-premises and we use the deploy, and sometimes we use OpenAI, and so I don't see a challenge that if you create the right modeling, and I see my engineers, they sort of, oh, now this is the best model. So, okay, we swap
the best model.
Yeah,
yeah
swap
right.
to Llama 3 or whatever. And then 2 weeks later, oh, this is the best. So because we build it in a modular way, it's very interchangeable for us.
It's not always, like the newest doesn't always mean better though, right? Because the different way is that they have been trained. I mean, we recently been going through a bunch of our use cases that we've built internally and taken to our clients and sort of trying to keep them up to date because they used to use 3.5 and now that's kind of on its way out. It's 4.0 mini, right? Is the kind of like for like sort of smaller model. And we're finding that the responses are quite different. They're more verbose, or they're just the way that they're responding is not in line with what we had before, which then leads you into, okay, well, I need to start thinking about how do I need to change my prompts, maybe start using kind of DSPy to start kind of automating some of that as well. But I guess the piece I'd sort of go back to and I sound like a broken record now, is like, what's the business reason for doing that, right? The 3.5 example is a good one, but you're just going to have to do it because they're going to stop serving the API, right? But if it ain't broke, like, push back on the business, right? That actually, are you going to get much more out of this? Or actually, should we spend our time building this other use case for you that's going to save you this many more man hours or is going to unlock this more business value than just tinkering around for something that's, you might shave off, 0.1 of a second in latency, or you might, whatever your metric is you're trying to optimize for, be a tiny fraction better. Like, challenge it, right? Well, let's focus on something new that's...
But sometimes cost is the driver, right? Sometimes your model are cheaper than the one you're using. So people say, why don't you use the newer model, let's say? And then
So that's a business use case of slicing code. I can tell you that a lot of use case includes, for example, this call center analytics. We moved from OpenAI to a fine-tuned small model. We saved about 2 orders of magnitude in cost. From analyzing a call took us like $3, we moved it to 2-3 cents. So sometimes there's a business reason, because the client told us, you know what, I'm not going to pay $1 million to analyze my calls.
Yeah. I think we agree that the old joke about money is no object, even in banking and telco, does not exist anymore. But let's look at, so I see people jump out to the beers already. Any last calls and questions? Because we start a little bit running now in a circle here. Any last, yes. Suddenly the arms go up. Whoa. Yeah, you guys still have time between beer and us, so bear with us.
Yeah, so you are mentioning about a Python framework, right? So similarly, can you touch upon some of the frameworks or tools, that you have used and that you recommend for a GenAI developer, in his GenAI development lifecycle?
Tools for just getting started experimenting, or tools for scaling up to production?
Probably both.
Okay.
Okay, you have time, right? You have a long list. Yeah. Top three.
Top tool for experimenting with models. There's the major API providers for the open source models. Ollama is a very nice tool for testing models via an API. Visualizing data. I would recommend our own product, Gnomic Atlas. So you run whatever GenAI model you want, generate a bunch of interaction data, and then visualize the clusters of that data and really understand what are the patterns by visualizing. And then the last thing that I would recommend is looking into Llama CPP, So there's a lot of really exciting work going on that's making more models fast and efficient on normal consumer devices, and Llama CPP is a software project that's enabling a lot of that. So I would look into checking that out.
Matt, top 3.
I mean, let's go back. Going back to sort of the test, like I mentioned it earlier, you know, the RAGAS framework has been really, really powerful for us. Things like Llama Index for doing, you know, the observability and tracing. And we've found quite a lot of benefit out of going back to some of the sort of DeBerta type models for basically applying kind of, like, not just throwing an LLM at something. Think about using an SLM to, like you said, you could massively reduce cost, you could massively reduce you know, latency, start exploring things like that.
And
Vectara,
sovereignty, right? This is one of the things what I get really engaged with lately, that people say, yeah, US provider, OpenAI, I love that, I love Azure, but I need to be in my country, somewhere around the globe. And so the approach to really have self-trained environments, and a large manufacturing company as well, they say, our stuff should never hit the internet, multi-billion pages of manufacturing detailed information, so they start putting their own models on that stuff, which is, by the way, quite expensive, to be clear. But, Yaron, your top 3.
My top one is using our
Our
open source framework called MLRun, which is sort of an MLOps framework, but got a lot of extensions towards GenAI, and whether it's fine-tuning models or it's serving models, as well as building all the pipeline, and a lot of what he does is automation towards production. You're right. Parameters and off you go. And you know, there are traditional candidates like LangChain, Llama Index, etc. that we also work with.
Cool. There was more. Yep, there in the back.
Yeah, I was just wondering if there's any scope for structuring unstructured data, and if that's going to help the RAG retrieval pipeline.
Yeah, maybe I can address it, because again, the data is part of the most challenging thing that we usually deal with. So we have sometimes clients that sort of overuse RAG. They're just like, oh, here's a nice document. We'll just start asking questions, and there is a task and text and some numbers associated nearby, and sometimes it hits and sometimes it doesn't. So there are some cases where we're telling the clients, no, you know, just pre-process, take the document, extract the data, create a table, and then build a tool to query the table. That will hallucinate a lot less, it will be faster, etc. We have other issues. For example, I'm working with a large banking client, have thousands of documents. Goes, here, let's just do RAG. I open some of the PDFs. My eyes sort of like, because you see charts and pictures of checks and signatures and graphs and whatever. So we're working now with NVIDIA on essentially using a multi-model to process the documents and start extracting the visual elements and understanding the block diagram. And then we take the original document, and then we create sort of the process documents, and we index the process documents. I mean, like visual embedding, some textual embedding, some in tables. And then we build the RAG to work across those various structured data elements.
What I found in my own work is that...
Speak more to the mic, please.
Sorry. What I found in my own work generally is that structured data work much better, and especially if you structure it in a way that's kind of retrievable across different systems. So might sound like a heresy here at this conference, but I'm using Neo4j for that.
We agree with that. Also, even with embeddings, we're trying to put keywords on the embeddings, so then we do a much more filtered, refined search.
And then you can basically recycle that and plug any model you want, any specialized model you want.
Cool. Everybody ready for a question? Arm went up. It's amazing. Every time I invoke the beers, the arms goes up, which is great, by the way. You guys still have a good time? Seriously? Yeah? Everybody still good? Raise hands. Anybody awake? Yeah? 1, 2. Okay, the rest sleeps. Fine.
Okay, I'll give the most boring question. So I hope not everybody won't fall asleep. But I'll circle back on the beginning of the conversation about vectors and quantizing them. So when there is a floating point numbers in the big array, I thought that the feature of vectorization is that allows you to have many different features in it, way more than the dimensionality of the vector itself, as in near perpendicular features. But if you quantize it all the way to binary, you only can have fully perpendicular or parallel vectors. So how does that contain enough information to be able to do the proper vector search?
That's a really interesting question. The dimensions store a lot more information than the decimals and the floating point numbers. So nomics embedding vectors, you can change them both ways to sort of reduce that amount of information. I can say, oh, let me use 100 dimensions instead of all dimensions, or you could chop the other way. Let me use binary or integers instead of full floating point numbers. And the really cool thing about high dimensions is that keeping many dimensions, but reducing to binary, does actually still preserve a ton of the information of where the embeddings are pointing. It's just this miracle of high dimensional space that you still preserve a lot of the information of where data is arranged in embedding space, even with that geometry that you're talking about of, oh, you're losing information. The information is lost a little bit, but the speed up and the memory savings are just so massive that when you're talking about really scaling applications, that matters a lot more for a lot of cases.
And hereby, I call it for one reason. We have a watch here, which tells us when we have to finish, and that watch is recycling the last 10 minutes on 25 minutes. So I have no idea how long we're actually talking, which is...
10.
Ah, yeah, so this thing is about 50 minutes straight. Okay, cool. Independent of that one, I think we had a good session. I would like to say thank you to all three gentlemen here. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Pleasure.
And